I work on a small dairy farm in the upper Midwest. It has kind of a strange layout, but I'll try my best to describe it. Right when you walk in, there's the milk house. Then if you keep going, you're in the parlor. Once you get to the edge of the parlor, you can turn left into our calf barn, or turn right and make your way out to the big barn where the milking cows are. I should also mention that the calf barn is connected to an older barn where we keep pregnant cows. The doors are never locked because we have people coming in at random times throughout the day. Plus it's a barn, and there are doors literally everywhere. Anyway, I'm a female who is fairly tiny, maybe 5'5" and around 120 pounds, and I'm still in high school. One night I was working the night shift, which is anywhere between 8:30 at night and 2 in the morning, because you never know how long the barn might take sometimes. Every shift we work with one other person, and this night happened to be with another high schooler around my age, but she's a bit taller than me. Every shift we milk the first pen, then I'll go into the calf barn and turn the lights on and start the pasteurizer so I can feed the calves. So I went and did that, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary, and I went back to help milk the second pen. After the second pen, I went to feed the calves. Here's a layout of the calf barn. There's an alley down the center, with the weaned calves on the left and hay and grain on the right for feeding. At the end of the alley is a big room. There's a row of 7 hutches right as you walk in from left to right, and then 2 in the left corner. Then there are 6 pens, 3 on each side with a little milk house in the middle for feeding purposes. The doors to the milk house are always closed to keep it warm in there, so I went inside and started my normal feeding routine, still not noticing anything strange. Then I opened the door on the other side of the milk house to feed the far pens, and that's when I noticed the older, almost weaned calves in the right pen were very skittish. I ignored it at first and went about what I was doing, and then I saw him. A man huddled in the corner of the pen, just sitting there in all black and bundled up because it was cold as hell out that night. He sat there just looking at me, smiling. In between those far 2 pens is a double door that, again, isn't locked, which makes it easy for someone to get in. I was holding a 5-gallon bucket filled with milk and I dropped it, spilling it all over the ground. I've never run so fast out of there. I told my coworker what happened and we hid in the break room for a little bit with our barn dog. We eventually got the courage to go back and check it out. But the man was gone and the double doors were wide open. Thinking back, we should have called the cops on him for trespassing, but he never threatened us or the cows and nothing went missing. I don't know if he was a homeless man looking for shelter in the cold or what, but our barn is a bit far out of town for that. What scares me most is that I walked in there more than once that day and still didn't notice him, so I have no idea how long he had been watching me. I've worked 2 night shifts since then and I work another one tonight. Since then, I've been sure to scan the barn and lock the doors while I'm feeding. So a note to everyone, not just farmers: always lock your doors. And to the creepy man in one of my calf pens, let's not meet. This takes place in a rural part of Wisconsin on a very late night last October. The city I live in has a population of around 12,000, but it is rather crowded in the center, and on the outskirts you can go quite a bit without seeing anyone. My friend and I were going to see a late showing of a movie, which started at around 9 p.m. I am 17 and my friend is 16. We're both relatively tough guys, not to be egotistical, but he's a linebacker on our high school football team, and I am in the Army Reserve. Just for a little background, at the time I was living with my dad in an apartment that was right next to my friend's, and in terms of location, my apartment was more in the town section of the city. There were a decent number of people, streetlights, and so on. So we got in my truck and went. To save time, we cut through my mom's farm on the outskirts of town, like we had done the other 1,000 times we had gone to a movie. We saw our movie without incident, but like I said, when we got out it was very late, probably around 12:30 in the morning. We still decided to cut through my mom's farm as I grew up there, and realistically there was nothing that was going to go wrong. Even though weird things happen there occasionally, nothing serious, but still enough to make you feel a little freaked out sometimes. We cut through my mom's farm without problems, but as we were about a mile down the road, going away from her place, I saw this man walking down the middle of the road. I was a little shocked, because he was right in the middle of the road in the middle of nowhere at 12:30 at night. If anything, he was either in distress, his car was broken, or something like that, or he was lost or just putting himself in danger, walking down the middle of a road without any lights or reflective clothing. But he simply walked slowly to the side of the street and let us pass. I was still very weirded out by this and asked my friend if I should turn around and see if he needed help. My friend tried to convince me that he was just a guy walking and that I should mind my own business. I went another mile or so, but I couldn't resist. I was 17 and I had never seen anything like this, and I had lived here my whole life. So I turned around and drove back toward him, and again I spotted him walking in the middle of the road. He walked off to the side, but now I saw something that made my jaw drop and made me pull over immediately. On his face, he was wearing this very, very, very odd black plastic object, like something you would see in a Saw movie. If you know what a ballistic face mask looks like, it was similar to that but more creepy looking. It looked like it had no purpose except to cover up a severe disfigurement behind the mask. Even with that, I was now actually concerned for the man, so I asked him, "Are you lost?" He replied with heavy breathing and a somewhat quiet voice, "No." I told him, "It is awfully late to be walking around here in the middle of the road in the middle of nowhere." He then said, "I do this all the time." I didn't want to bother this man because you can never be too sure, and I didn't want to come off as a harassing jerk either. So I told him to be careful and I turned around. The first thing I did was call the police and told them basically everything I said in this post, minus the details about me and my friend. They said they would have a sheriff come out and investigate, which I have no idea if they did, as we were home in about 10 minutes. I told my dad, who was skeptical, but he still found it a bit creepy. I may have overreacted. I do that sometimes. But at the same time, I have never seen anything like this in my life. It was like something you see in a horror movie. But the scariest part of the whole night was when he said, "I do this all the time." The reason this was so frightening was because I grew up on that farm, and I now live there. He could be outside my house right now or when I'm asleep. Thank God for guns. This story happened when I was 17 years old, at the beginning of spring. I was starting to get into volunteering and community work, and the city I was studying in was famous for its volunteering programs. A few friends I'd made there told me about their experiences woofing in the country and recommended I check it out during spring vacation. For those who are unfamiliar with the term, woofing means joining a family or a community that does farm work of some kind, and helping them out for a few days in exchange for food and lodging. This really sounded like something I'd enjoy, along with an opportunity to learn some useful skills and make new friends. So I went on the website and signed up. I live very close to the French border, and quickly found a nice place less than an hour away from where I lived. The photos and introduction made it look like a very boring community of farmers that spent their free time drinking tea and singing campfire songs, which was exactly what I was looking for, both because I enjoyed peace and quiet, and because it would reassure my mom, who was really stressed out about the whole thing. So finally the day came and my mom's boyfriend came to pick us up and drive us to the farm. My mom had been getting progressively more nervous as the hour of separation approached. It was pretty understandable, it being the first time she would be leaving her teenage daughter to basically fend for herself in another country for a whole 9 days. Her stress didn't bleed down to me though, as I was pretty used to her being afraid, and she had a similar reaction whenever it was time for me to leave for camp or a week-long school trip. We arrived at the farm and an old man approached us to ask if I was the volunteer they were expecting, and we went to get my bags from the car and set them in the hallway. After I'd said my goodbyes, the old man, who told me to call him Donnie, explained that the guy who would be taking care of me during my stay would be late, as he'd forgotten I was coming and was out of town at the moment. It didn't bother me very much, and he put me to work immediately, feeding the chickens and collecting their eggs, and putting prices and tags on vegetables in the small self-service store they had out back. I was pretty happy since this was pretty much everything I'd imagined I would be doing, and Donnie was nice to work with. Inside the house, the kitchen, which was right next to the hallway where I had left my bags, had a fridge that was covered in punk stickers and a flyer of tour locations for various bands. I even spotted a few that I listened to regularly. I was pretty stoked at the prospect of sharing common interests with the household, despite the realization my week wouldn't be as peaceful as expected. Finally, my caretaker arrived and Donnie left, bidding me good luck. He was the father of the man who owned the house and lived nearby, but wasn't actually a member of the community. The man who would be guiding me during my stay turned out to be a green mohawk sporting 30-year-old named Ben. He apologized for missing my arrival, and we set out to explore the farm. The house was huge and the layout was complicated. A lot of twists and turns, stairs in strange places, and a bunch of entrances in various areas made it pretty difficult to find your way if you were new there. He introduced me to a few of the house's inhabitants, 12 people in total, each with their own room, and showed me the room I would be staying in for the weekend. I'd arrived on a Saturday. I wanted to be here for as long as possible, so I'd included both weekends, and he'd failed to mention it would be awkward for them, and so they'd put me in the smallest room of the house. The room was on the very last floor, in an area still under repairs. A tiny room in the middle of which was a small bed, too short and narrow for me to comfortably fit my slightly taller than average frame into, and a weird, musty smell that came from the left wall. It was impossible to ignore if you were lying on the bed and difficult to bear for more than a few seconds. It was one of those smells that make you feel like you're going to get horribly infected if you stay around too long. Careful to set my bags as far away from that wall as possible, I decided to keep my complaints to myself and just stay awake and wander the house for the next 2 nights, reassured by the promise of a much nicer room come Monday night. I'd stayed awake and alert for longer before, so this wasn't something I thought would be very difficult. And I didn't want the household to think of me as a rude and ungrateful brat. We went back down to the kitchen and talked a bit with some of the occupants. As he got a beer out of the fridge to fight his hangover, Ben explained they were hosting a punk band inside the house tonight, since there was a concert in the village, and they would also welcome some fans and a few visiting friends, which was why I didn't have a nicer room. We set up camp beds and various accommodations throughout the house, and then sat down in the kitchen. All of us got along pretty well, talking about the differences in Swiss and French punk scenes and a bunch of other subjects while Ben was downing beer after beer. This didn't make him any less friendly, even as he started slurring his words, and finally a few of the guests arrived and we all headed out to the bar. I didn't stay very long. The place didn't serve food, I didn't know anybody there, and hadn't brought earplugs. I went back to the house, and once I was inside I found a room with a couch to read a book on my phone and wait for morning. As the hours passed, I heard a lot of strange things from the occupants. A fight between a mother and daughter about no longer being a coward, taking a stand and starting hypnotherapy. Many barking dogs and a person that seemed to be traveling through the house with a boom box that was blasting Nirvana. Finally, at around 3 a.m, I was asked to leave the room because the couch I was on was going to be used as a bed by a few extra guests. The after party had started in the house and now everyone was here. I found another room with a couch where I was hoping to settle down until morning and pulled out my phone again. There were a lot of people in the room, Ben included, as well as an old man in a leather jacket snoring on the other couch next to me. Ben came over asking if I wanted to join the party and talk to a few people, saying it was sad to see me all alone and silent, and that I should go with them and have some fun. I assured him I was perfectly fine and told him to go back to his guests. After a while, the party ended up moving upstairs, and I was on my own. The old man in the leather jacket started making strange choking noises, and I was worried he would just die right there. I didn't know what I should do or if he was okay, and the situation made me very sad. Here he was, over 60 years old, drunk on a stranger's couch, far away from any kind of family, dying next to a teenager who would not help him. Ben then arrived and assured me this was normal, and started chatting. He told me about his days following bands around the country and looking for work here and there. I wasn't exactly in a talking mood as it was very late, and all the strange things I'd seen today had tired me out. He had been smoking and drinking pretty much without stopping since this afternoon, and was starting to smell. And the cigarette smoke he was trying and failing not to blow into my face was giving me a headache. I was not in a good mood, but the man gave off such an air of profound sadness that I couldn't find it in my heart to be rude to him. He kept on chatting and I politely humored him, cracking jokes and listening to his stories, which he apparently took for friendlier than it was meant to be, because he started to playfully poke me in the arm. I scooted away slightly and cooled down the tone in which I was speaking, and thankfully he stopped. As he was pretty much going to be my boss for the rest of the week, I didn't want to make things awkward between us, and so when he asked if he was bothering me, I said he didn't. He then apologized for the day I'd had, explaining it was because of poor planning on his part and a lack of talent for organization. I truly wasn't that bothered by it and decided to crack one more joke since he was pretty clearly ill at ease about the situation. Something along the lines of, "Don't worry, dude, I was young once too." As soon as it came out of my mouth, I regretted it. I couldn't explain it, but I had the feeling of having made a monumental mistake. He resumed the poking and changed the subject. We talked about music and records, and he offered to show me a few they had in the house. I had no interest in moving before sunrise, at which point I would take a walk outside to wake myself up, so I declined. He insisted. I should come upstairs and mingle a bit, be with people instead of all by myself in the dark. I explained I wasn't a huge fan of crowds, but he kept insisting. So then I said I'd rather not walk around and wake up everybody, not to mention having to step over all the possibly dead people littering the hallways. He replied it was no big deal, that we could use one of the many doors that lead in and out to go around the house silently. Exasperated, I finally gave up. telling myself I would stay for 20 minutes and then find an excuse to leave. I followed him as we exited the house and went around the back to the other entrance. The house was an absolute labyrinth, but after spending the day in it, I had a vague idea of where the important rooms were. The room I knew the party had moved to, in which I could remember seeing an extensive record library, was to the right of the hallway we were currently walking down. He went to the left and opened the door to his bedroom. "So are you coming in?" I was too busy looking frantically around the room for a sharp object to stab him with to answer. A small part of my brain was going, "Of course this was going to happen, of course, you idiot." And the other part was busy calculating just how badly I had messed up. If I indicated how terrified and unwilling I was, he would either become mortified, apologize, and let me leave, very unlikely, or he wouldn't, much more likely, and very bad for me. If I screamed, I wasn't guaranteed to be heard over all the music and the talking. And if I were to be heard, I wasn't guaranteed to be helped. After all, everyone in this house knew and liked this guy, and none of them particularly cared about me. What if this was a regular thing that they all turned a blind eye to? What if someone were to come and help him instead of me? I wanted to throw up. He was so drunk he was basically dead, and I was perfectly sober and knew how to fight. But this guy was still a lot bigger than me, so in a struggle I was also at a disadvantage. I decided not to break the social veneer of normalcy. Nothing strange was going on, and so there was no reason for him to be anything other than friendly and polite. If I managed to find a way to leave without arousing suspicion, I might still make it out alive. I tried to get out of it, saying I had been under the impression we were going to join the party and that it sounded like a lot of fun. An excuse not to go in, yes, but also a subtle plea for the small percentage of chance that this was in fact just a misunderstanding, and that he would notice my discomfort and let me go. He replied, "I thought you didn't like crowds," pretty much shattering any hope I had that he wasn't in fact a creep, but a regular person who wouldn't ignore someone's signs of distress just because it would mean they won't get what they want. So despite the paralyzing fear, I composed myself and stepped inside his room. He closed the door behind me and stepped around to show me his records. He asked if there were any in particular I wanted to listen to, or if I would like to watch a movie instead. I immediately picked the movie, figuring it would buy me more time to figure out what I needed to do, and he pulled up his computer to show me the movies he had downloaded. He was sitting on a couch to the left of the door and had placed the computer on a small table in front of it. I sat down on the floor to make it more difficult for him to touch me without warning, and he told me about his movie collection, something about the 1980s American kung fu genre, to which I replied I was too young to know about the stuff, and far too young to die. I chose Lord of the Rings again to buy myself time. He got up to turn off the lamps and I panicked, saying something about my vision being pretty bad and needing light to see the movie. He tried to turn off yet another smaller lamp, and again I begged him not to. My excuse was such obvious BS that it was impossible for him not to realize. But he still did nothing, and my sense of danger just kept increasing. He sat down on the floor next to me and started the movie. Every second felt like an eternity. I was convinced I would throw up if this went on any longer. I could see him in the corner of my eye, turning his head to look at me from time to time. I had scooted away as far as possible, again with the bad vision excuse, too far to really see the screen, but at an angle where I could see him quite well without having to turn my head or move my eyes. A few times he tried starting conversation. "So, what do you like besides music and farming?" he asked in a strange, conspiratorial tone, as if we weren't the only people in the room. "I like Lord of the Rings," I replied. "Especially love the scene we're watching right now, so be quiet." Through the window, I could see the black sky turning a slight tinge of blue. There it was, my excuse to leave. I told him I wanted to take a walk at sunrise earlier. As soon as there was light outside, I could use this to go. It wasn't foolproof by any means, but I was so tired and so scared, and so tired of being scared, and this was the best I had. All I had to do was survive for half an hour at most, and I'd be out of there. It wasn't guaranteed, but I had to believe in it. Thankfully, I didn't have to wait for long. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see his head lolling down. He'd fallen asleep. I was free, but before I could get up and run with everything I had, I realized the cigarette he'd been smoking had fallen from his mouth onto the carpet. The carpet was laid onto a wooden floor inside a wooden house. This place could burn down along with all the 50 people currently inside of it. I was paralyzed. I knew I had to take this chance and leave, but I couldn't just let the house burn. I definitely wasn't going to reach over to take the cigarette and risk getting close to him. But what else could I do? And that's when he woke up. He saw the cigarette and put it out himself, saving me the trouble. But now he was awake again. I should have let all those people burn, I thought. Now I was back in hell. He hadn't seen me looking at him, thank God, and was still pretty sluggish. It didn't take long for him to fall back asleep, and this time I didn't hesitate. I was on my feet immediately, reaching for the door. As soon as it opened, I would be out and completely safe. Nothing could harm me once I was out the door, and my mom would be there to take me home, and it would all just be a bad dream. It was locked. That psychopath had locked the door. I could feel the scream forming at the base of my throat, but I kept it down. I was so close I couldn't give up now. I looked around frantically and finally saw a metallic glint above my head on top of the closet. I was tall enough to touch it, with a little bit of struggle. That sicko had put it where it was difficult to reach. I was convinced that if I were to open that closet right now, I would find a suit made out of the skin of women he'd previously murdered. I had the key in my hand and I turned around to see he'd been staring the whole time. The scream was really threatening to break now. I smiled embarrassedly as if to say, "Dear me, look at how much I struggle to reach high places on which creeps leave the keys of the rooms they lock me into. So awkward, right?" And I put the key in the lock at the most unhurried, normal pace I could manage. "Where are you going?" "I'm going to Mordor, you idiot." "Where the hell do you think I'm going?" "I'm having such a pleasant time being locked in here with a 30-year-old man who smells like vomit that it wouldn't occur to me to leave. I was just testing the locks to see if they were working properly." He looked so pathetic, bleary, and dead drunk on the ground, while I was standing over him with the key to freedom in my hand. For a second, he stopped looking so menacing, and I had the brief, fleeting urge to stomp him to death with my boots. Nothing like a pair of docks to make you feel unrealistically powerful. Thankfully, I didn't forget the traumatizing danger I had been in for the last hour or so, and kept it together. I smiled and said, "Dude, you're falling asleep. I'm not going to impose myself when you're so tired. Good night." I turned the key and opened the door, and I was out. After that, I practically ran out of the house into the garden where the adrenaline crashed and my knees gave out from under me. It was 4 a.m, so I couldn't call my mother, but I sent her a text hoping she'd wake up soon, telling her everything was fine, but that farming was lame and I wanted to go home. I made up some excuse to the first person I saw that I'd hurt my knee and needed to leave, and to apologize to everyone for me. After a few hours spent shaking with fear and shock, my mom and her boyfriend arrived to pick me up, got my bags, and we left. So Ben, let's never ever meet again. For the past several years, I have been working in a moderately sized amusement park in the middle of the city. I work at the admissions desks, which means that the work is quite administrative, answering the phones, responding to emails, and admitting customers into the park. Being in the middle of the city, you meet a lot of interesting characters, from old locals to traveling tourists. For the most part, I enjoy the work, but every so often you speak to a customer or receive a complaint that doesn't do much for staff morale. Still, I always try my hardest to stay positive. Over the years, I've seen plenty of people stand in front of me at the front desks. There have been drunks, stoners, happy and sad people, angry parents, and an abundance of complaints to top it all off. But until last week, a customer had never personally threatened me in anger. For context about how this conflict began, the specific amusement park I work at has a family loyalty system. You can purchase a ticket that is valid for a set number of people to visit the park, as many times as they like within 12 months. If they wish, they could come to the park all 365 days of the year using this ticket. The catch is that it is only valid for the people named on the ticket. There is also a photograph on the ticket once it is scanned, so that we can identify the people who the ticket is valid for when they arrive. There are procedures in place so the tickets can't be misused. Otherwise, neighbors, friends, or families could pass them around, and we would essentially be letting people in for free. For example, if a group of 4 arrived at the park and only 2 were named on the ticket, only those 2 would be allowed in under the ticket. The other 2 would need to pay for their admission. If a ticket is handed to an admission staff member and no one present is named or photographed on the ticket, it will be retained by the staff and sent back to the owners with a warning. If it happens a second time, the ticket will be canceled. With this in mind, last week a family of 4 approached my till and handed me one of these loyalty tickets. Upon scanning it, I saw that none of the people in front of me were photographed on the ticket. The biggest giveaway was the father of the family. In the photo, he was in his mid-30s with cropped black hair. The man in front of me was in his late 50s or early 60s, with long, graying hair. Seeing this, I asked the guests if the ticket was theirs, as the family in the photo looked different. The father replied, "Yes, our friends sold it to us before they moved back to Poland. It is ours now," in one of the thickest Russian accents I had heard since starting my job. Selling or transferring these tickets is prohibited, especially without notifying the amusement park beforehand. 99 times out of 100, it was sold to us by our friends, is the excuse used when a ticket is just being borrowed among friends. After clarifying that no one present had been on the ticket originally, I informed the father that it could not be used that day, and that the admission fee of $15 per person would need to be paid. The father asked for the ticket back. I told him I couldn't do that. We would retain the ticket and mail it back to the original owners ourselves. When he heard this, the father's demeanor changed completely. He held out his hand and ordered me to give the ticket back. I don't usually do well in confrontations and try to avoid them, but the way he spoke rubbed me the wrong way. I insisted it was beyond my authority to give the ticket back. He ordered me again, pointing to his hand, with an increasing level of anger in his voice that sent chills down my back. He even said he would personally return the ticket to the owners himself, despite them having moved to Poland. This continued back and forth for 1 or 2 minutes. Realizing I wasn't going to get anywhere by arguing, I placed the ticket behind the counter and looked for a loyalty ticket application form to show him the rules and consequences of misusing the tickets. As I pulled out the form, the man lunged over the counter to grab the ticket. I swiped the ticket onto the floor out of his reach. He lunged at me once more but couldn't reach. That's when I lost all patience and raised my voice, telling him he just couldn't do that. I picked up the ticket and told him I was taking it to the back office to be canceled. At this point, a security guard approached and told me to find a supervisor to handle the situation. I went into the back office and explained what had happened to a supervisor. They took the ticket and returned to the floor with me. The man was now in a heated argument with security over how I had stolen the card he claimed to have bought. My supervisor checked the ticket again, confirmed it was being misused, and told the man it would be canceled. He argued with her, growing more frustrated and changing his story. Now he claimed he was the original owner of the ticket, and that he didn't know the family in the photo. It was clear that if his family hadn't been there, he might have escalated the situation further. After some time, he calmed down enough to throw $100 at me to pay the $60 fee for his family. As I handed him his change, he leaned in close and said softly, "Remember this, the world is a small place. I will see you on the street one night and you will wish we never met." He left. I continued to serve 2 more customers, somewhat dazed, before the park manager came over and invited me into the office to explain what had happened. After I explained the incident and told the manager what the man had said, he called for several security guards to remove him from the park. This was achieved in less than 30 minutes. His family was allowed to remain in the park. The rest of the day went by without incident. The park usually closes at 8 p.m., but if it is particularly quiet, some admission staff are allowed to leave early while guests exit. On this day, I was let go at 7:30 p.m. I don't have a car, but luckily my sister was on her way home from work and stopped by to pick me up. I waited in the office until she arrived, chatting with the supervisors and making lighthearted talk about the day. When my sister texted to say she was right outside the admissions building, I went to the car park. On the way, I saw the man from earlier, greasy gray hair, sitting in his car, staring at me. For a split second, I thought that this was the moment of reckoning he had promised, before realizing he was probably waiting for his family to come out of the park. Despite this, he never took his eyes off me as I passed his car, and looked at me with pure hatred. I had genuinely never seen anyone look at me that way before, and it was half terrifying. A week has passed, and I haven't run into the man since. No phone calls or emails from him either, so I'm in the clear for now. Either way, to the angry Russian man with gray hair who threatened me at work, I know the world is a small place, but please, let's not meet again. When I was old enough to be home alone, but still at that young in-between age, I lived in a court in a lower-end, middle-class neighborhood. It was a small and developing town right before the boom of city growth. It was the kind of place with one grocery store in the middle of town. A pretty quiet place where kids would play from sunrise to late at night, with no real worries. To explain better, my court was a U-shape with about 8 houses in it. There was really only one way in and one way out. My friend and I lived across the street from each other, right before the curve rounding the U. We were both about 3 houses away from the exit. It wasn't a busy street at the entrance, so we could play in the main street for hours and usually only run into people who lived in our court. That's how dead the area around us was. No one came by unless they were visiting someone in our court. There wasn't any reason for people to walk or drive by, because there were easier ways to get to the other homes. Going past our court meant going out of your way. I should also add that my friend's parents weren't friendly and they hated people coming to their house, so we only ever went to my house or played in the court. That becomes important later. It was Halloween and I had decided to stay home and trick or treat around our neighborhood with my friend, who I'll call Ashley, who lived across the street. It was late Halloween and the younger kids had gone home hours ago. The streets were silent except for us. My family had left earlier to go to one of the rich neighborhoods to get the large king-size chocolate bars. After that, they were going to hang out at a friend's house and come home late, or maybe spend the night depending on how things went. I didn't want to hang out with my younger siblings and their friends, I just wanted to be with Ashley, so I asked to stay home alone. My mom agreed with the promise that I would go inside and lock the house as soon as she left. I agreed. It was close to 10 or 11 at night, and our night had gone great. Things were winding down while Ashley waited for her parents to call her inside for bed. We sat on the curb in front of my house talking, which in that preteen stage was pretty normal. That's when we noticed a middle-aged man walk past the end of our court looking around as he passed. He paused when he noticed us. He slowed down and stared at us for a moment as he walked. It didn't seem like a big deal, but something felt off. I can still picture him clearly because I remember how odd it felt seeing him. We grew up in a small town where everyone knew everyone, and I didn't recognize this man, and he was white and average looking with a bit of a beer belly. It was dark, but I could make him out under the streetlights as he casually passed our court. He wasn't a local. Ashley asked if I knew him. I shook my head no, and we went back to talking. Something about him made her start keeping an eye on the entrance. "He's walking by again," Ashley said, and then again and again and again. He wasn't dressed for a long walk or a jog. He wore a tan jacket, dark blue jeans, and what looked like heavy work boots. You don't go out for a long planned walk in boots like that. But we were dumb kids and ignored the red flags. Until the 5th time. That's when we got freaked out. "Hey, that guy passed again," Ashley said, frowning as I turned my back to the entrance. He wasn't walking anymore. He was casually standing under the streetlight at the entrance of our court, on the same side we were on, staring. I remember how awkward he looked, shoving his hands into his pockets like he was trying to act casual, except he just kept staring at me. We got creeped out as he kept looking around the empty street then back at me, before he went back to walking past our court. Something inside me told me to leave. He didn't look creepy at first. He looked like a typical suburban dad, but his eyes just stared at me. "I'm creeped out. Let's go inside before he comes back," Ashley said. We stood up trying to ignore the fear since he was gone again. I walked her across the street to her house. I was always the friend who acted like the mom, making sure everyone got home before I went inside. Yes, you probably see where this is going. I walked her to her door, then headed back to mine. Everything seemed fine. I ran across the street to my front door, happy to get inside. I turned the doorknob, trying to get into the safety of my house, when the knob refused to turn. I held my breath while trying again and again. That's when it hit me. I didn't have a house key. The door wasn't supposed to be locked unless we were inside sleeping. This was before cell phones. My family had accidentally locked me out with no way to reach them. I panicked. I was locked outside with that creepy man somewhere nearby. I moved away from the front door trying to calm myself, and decided to go through the backyard and try the sliding glass doors, which also shouldn't have been locked. I walked on the small path back toward the side gate. That was my plan. I remember stopping suddenly like the air just left me. The man was at the end of the street again. There was no way he had done another full lap. He must have just pretended to keep walking. His eyes lit up and he smiled when he saw I was still outside. He raised his hand in a casual hello before he started walking toward me. His steps were slow and casual, like he was just out for a walk, but he stared straight at me. I panicked and bolted across the street to Ashley's house, abandoning the idea of trying my own door again. Ashley's house was the only place with lights on, and I needed an adult right then. I ran up the stone walkway and pounded on the door, pushing the doorbell repeatedly. Ashley opened it, confused by my panicked face. "I'm locked out and Ashley, he's coming." I remember yelling, trying to push inside. I was terrified. "I have to ask my mom." Those words crushed me as she quickly closed the door. She probably didn't understand the danger. I cried as the door slammed in my face. I turned back to see where the man was now. He had started walking again and was only about a house and a half away. The second I turned and saw him, he stopped pretending to walk. He suddenly started running directly toward me, cutting diagonally across the street. I pressed the doorbell over and over in what felt like forever, until Ashley opened the door again, grabbed my arm and yanked me inside, slamming the door and locking it. I was in tears as she held on to me. We moved to the side window and looked out. I remember the angry look on his face as he stood exactly where I had been standing. He gave me a dirty look, his chest heaving, then slowly backed away down the walkway. He shoved his hands into his pockets and turned away, walking out of our court. I don't remember much after that. I remember breaking down crying as Ashley's mom came over, realizing it was serious. I remember the cops being called and giving a statement. I stayed with Ashley until my parents got home. Ashley's dad walked me home and explained everything to them. I remember my mom hugging me and apologizing, saying my younger 8-year-old brother must have locked the door because he was paranoid about bad guys. I don't remember being home alone again until we moved years later. I can still remember this night clearly. I still can't figure out what his intentions were. Kidnapping, something worse. To this day, nothing makes sense to me. I still get paranoid at night, especially around strangers who smile too much. This happened about 5 years ago, around the 15th of January 2020, right before the pandemic. I'm a guy, I was 19 when it happened, and I was in my second year of college in Paris, studying arts. With a couple of girls in my class, we decided to go to a Da Vinci exhibition at the Louvre. It was an exhibition that is only on display once every few decades. It was advised by one of our professors. That day we left school at 5 in the evening, and we went to a bar nearby before going to the exhibition. I had a few drinks and quickly got tipsy. I was very skinny back then and I hadn't had anything to eat. Then we took the metro and made it to the Louvre. We had time to see the whole thing and do some sketches of our favorite artworks. Then at around 8 in the evening, we left the exhibition to go home. We all went our own ways. I got on the train that would drop me off in my city, and when I sat down, I realized that my phone battery was at 18%, and that I had my battery bank but not the charger. I was annoyed because my phone was the only way I could wake up in the morning since I no longer had an alarm clock at that time. I remember that I had used my phone in class earlier that day for some drawing models and that I had plugged my phone in to charge it a bit. So I sent a message in the Messenger class group chat and asked if anyone saw my charger in the classroom. Some of my classmates would stay in the school for a few hours after our last classes to study or keep working on their projects. One of them replied with a picture of my charger on a table in the classroom and a text saying, "I took it with me and I will give it back to you tomorrow morning." I thanked them and thought to myself, okay, now how do I make sure that I wake up on time tomorrow morning? It was the only charger that I had. All the other ones I owned were no longer working, and I was the only one at home who had this brand, so I couldn't even have used my mom's or my brother's. I asked the guy who was sitting next to me if he had a charger that I could use, if he wasn't getting off the train anytime soon, so that I could charge my phone for as long as possible. He replied, "No, I don't, but check at the next station if the store is still open so you can buy one." When we reached the next station, we could see that the store was already closed. Then the guy turned to me and said, "It's closed, but I have one at home that you can use. I live right next to the station." I was still a little dizzy from the alcohol that I had a few hours earlier, and I was getting tired, so my reflexes weren't really on point. And I answered, "Okay," instead of simply asking someone else. In my head, it was like he would go to his house, bring the charger, and let my phone charge for a bit with the battery bank. Then I would give it back to him and go home. But even that scenario didn't make much sense. The guy was supposed to get off 3 stations before mine. When we reached his station, we both got off. It was January, so it was already completely dark outside. The guy said, "Follow me." At that moment, I had this horrible feeling telling me, Don't follow him, go back on that train and go home." I quickly got some kind of anxiety attack and simply just let myself go. So I went and followed him. I knew deep down that what I was doing was stupid and senseless, but it felt like I wasn't myself. I was totally stressed out and anxious and went with him. We exited the train station and walked to the streetcar station next to it and got on the streetcar. The fear was rising as we were getting there, and it kept getting worse and worse. I was like, "What am I doing here? Just leave. Something is not right, just leave and go home." But I couldn't, I felt petrified. It was like I couldn't even control myself. I think that the guy was talking to me the whole time and I was just nodding. I wasn't even paying attention. From what I can remember, he was pretty much taller than me and much stronger than me, and he had a backpack with cartoonish-looking cow heads all over it. We got off the streetcar at the closest stop. We walked up the adjacent street, maybe around 100 to 150 meters, and we stopped in front of a gate. He opened the gate with his fob, and I stayed in the street as he crossed it. He turned to me and said, "What are you doing? Come with me." In my head, I was like, "No," but then I crossed the gate and followed him. This was the entrance of the apartment complex that he lived in. After the gate, there was a long trail leading to a very large patio, with multiple other trails leading to 3 different buildings. It was nighttime, so I couldn't see much even though there were a few light poles. We walked up to his building, which was at the very end of the patio, the furthest one from the exit of the complex. In my head, I was still imagining something like him throwing the charger through a window to me so I could use it, which makes no sense at all. But again, I followed him into the building. We went up the stairs to the 2nd floor and went inside his apartment. Once inside, he said, "You may sit down, I'll be right there," as he turned the TV on, gave me a phone charger that was in the night table drawer, and he went to the bathroom. I sat down and thought to myself, well, now you're in deep trouble. I plugged my phone in. My battery was now at 9% and my phone wasn't charging correctly. I noticed after a few seconds that the charger was ripped and I had to tilt my phone and the charger in a specific way. I looked around me and saw that the apartment was very small and messy. It was basically just a bedroom with a small hallway between the entrance and the main space with a door to the bathroom in the hallway. There was a corner of the room that was being used as a kitchen. The bed was the only thing that I could sit on. It was unmade and there were a lot of unfolded clothes and clutter everywhere. After a minute or so, he came out of the bathroom and sat right next to me on the bed. I still had my jacket and shoes on and my backpack on. I played it cool, but I was terrified inside. He asked me if I wanted anything to drink or eat, and I declined, and said that I would be leaving soon anyway because I needed to wake up early in the morning. He then replied, "You can stay overnight if you want," and I responded, "No, thank you." I was sitting on the part of the bed that was closer to the nightstand, and he was between me and the hallway leading to the entrance door. At this point, he was just watching TV and I was staring at the wall, not moving an inch and just petrified. And just like that, out of nowhere, he put his hand on my right thigh. I hate physical contact, even with my own family and friends. It was too much for me to handle, so I called my mother. She already knew that I wasn't going to go home right after school because of the exhibition. I was trying to buy some time while I was trying to figure out how to leave without him trying to stop me. So I talked to my mother, just telling her how my day was and my time at the Louvre, and I told her that I was on my way home. I managed to keep my composure so she wouldn't notice anything. The last thing I wanted was to worry her and risk him acting up. After a few minutes, my mom said she was getting sleepy and going to bed. She said goodnight and hung up. I looked to my right at the guy. He still had his hand on my thigh. I locked eyes with him for 2 seconds, and suddenly my heart started racing. I was terrified. I almost cried and I could hardly breathe. I called my dad and thankfully he picked up. My parents aren't together anymore and I was living with my mom, so my father didn't know about my visit to the Louvre. I did the same thing and told my dad about how my day was and what I saw. I kept finishing most of my sentences with Dad so that the guy clearly knew who I was talking to, hoping it would prevent him from doing anything. Because of the fear, I was breathing heavily. At some point, my dad asked why I was breathing like that, and I said that I was walking fast to catch my train. Then I told my dad, "Okay, Dad, now I'm going to have to run so I don't miss the train. Please don't hang up, stay on the phone." And he said, "Okay." I quickly got up without unplugging the charger. It unplugged by itself as I stood. I started walking toward the exit. I said, "Gotta go," to the guy. I pressed the doorknob, but it was locked. I hadn't noticed that when I came in. I panicked and the guy got up, walked to me, unlocked the door and opened it. Then he said, "Come back anytime." And then he licked my neck. He had left his arm in the doorway, so I had to bend to walk beneath it and out of the apartment, and he spanked me as I walked out. Once I was outside of the apartment, I started running. I ran down the stairs, skipped a few steps, ran out of the building, ran across the patio, all the way to the gate. I was finally out of the complex, but I still ran all the way to the streetcar stop. I was just hoping that he wasn't following me or that no one he knew was coming after me. Thankfully, the streetcar arrived right when I reached the stop. When the streetcar left, my father was still on the phone. I said, "Okay, I'm on the train now. I will let you know when I'm home." He told me to be careful and that he'd be waiting for my message. Then he hung up. From that moment, I felt relieved, but I couldn't help thinking, what if I didn't have the idea of calling my parents? What if he had tried something worse? Or what if he had just never let me out? Or someone else was in there? Anything could have happened. After all, I was in his apartment, in his universe. He could have done anything. Now I always trust my gut, and if I sense anything strange, I listen to my body, pay attention to signs, and of course, never talk to strangers on public transit. It was almost 9:30 in the evening by the time I was on the train that would drop me off in my city. I made it home by 10:30 in the evening. Everyone was asleep. I let my dad know that I made it home and he responded, "Okay, thank you and good night." My phone battery was still very low, slightly over 20% I think. I went to bed but I couldn't sleep for hours. I woke up the next morning, went to school, and my classmate brought me my charger and I went on with my day. I only told one of my closest friends about it a year later. When I think about it now, it kind of makes me laugh because of how stupid it sounds. But this truly was the scariest thing I've ever experienced.